Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. I'm Task Force Bourbon. Today we're going to be doing something special. As you can see laid out here before me, we have a selection from the Jack Daniel's line of bourbons. We'll be doing a blind flight fight. We have a Legacy Edition Jack Daniel's. We'll talk about that a little later on. We have Gentleman Jack. We'll also be talking about that later on. We have the very special Jack Daniel's 10-year-old age-dated bourbon. And we finally have, last but not least, the Jack Daniel's 100 proof bottled and bond offering. This will go from 86 proof, it actually goes all the way around. This will go to 80 proof, 86 proof. This is 97 proof, and of course, bottled and bond is 100 proof. But before we get into each one of these bottles, I'm going to talk a little bit about Jack Daniel's, the history of Jack Daniel's, and then each one of these bottles as they are themselves. So Jack Daniel's was established in 1866 and is now the top-selling American whiskey in the world. It's produced in Lynchburg, Tennessee, as most of you all know, which has been owned by the Brown-Forman Corporation since 1956. If this name sounds familiar to you bourbon folks, it should, because Brown-Forman is also the parent company to Old Forester and Woodford Reserve. Now, the Jack Daniel Distillery, while, like I said already, is in Lynchburg, Tennessee, is situated in and around a hollow known as Stillhouse Hollow or Jack Daniel's Hollow, where a spring flows from a cave at the base of a limestone cliff. Jack Daniel's home county of Moore is ironically a dry county, so the product is not available for purchase within the county, but as fortunate for them, is readily available for sale all around and elsewhere in the world. The standard mash bill for most Jack Daniels is made from 80% corn, 12% rye, and 8% malted barley. All right, this is where the topic of today is going to turn a little bit contentious in the bourbon community. The product meets the regulatory criteria for classification as straight bourbon. ... Right. Though the company disavows the classification. All right, there it is. The company refers to the filtration step as mellowing. Right. This extra step, known more commonly as the Lincoln County process, removes impurities and, as they say sometimes, has the taste of corn. The company argues this extra step makes the product different from bourbon. However, Tennessee whiskey is required to be a, quote, straight bourbon whiskey under terms of the North American Free Trade Agreement and Canadian law. Tennessee whiskey is classified as straight bourbon authorized to be produced in the state of Tennessee. Tennessee Law 57-2-106 further requires producers of Tennessee whiskey to filter the spirit through charcoal made from maple prior to aging. This process, like I said, is known as the Lincoln County process. Jack Daniel's allows its whiskey to drip for 6 days in 10-foot vats, passing through charcoal that was made by burning maple wood that had been impregnated with 140 proof Jack Daniel's whiskey. So the extra step does not make it bourbon. While they, like we see here on every one of their labels, proudly listed as a Tennessee whiskey, it is that too, right? There is a contentious note here, like I said, because the history goes a little deeper. Many years ago, the company took steps to prevent the federal government from forcing them to call their whiskey bourbon. This is why some people insist that Jack Daniel's is bourbon, because it meets every legal requirement. Bourbon in all but name is another way of saying that. So why isn't Jack Daniel's called bourbon? The answer goes back to the repeal of Prohibition in 1933, when the American distilling business restarted. New rules were put in place. They defined that most different types of distilled spirits in great detail and required producers to use the type classifications that described their products the closest. If your whiskey met the standards of bourbon, you had to call it bourbon. At least that seemed to be the rule. When they eventually did submit their label for approval, they did not use the bourbon classification. That began a series of negotiations between the government and Lem Motlow's son, Rigor. We'll talk about who Lem Motlow is later. The family had never called their whiskey bourbon before, and they didn't intend to start now. Jack Daniel was told by the government that they had to call it bourbon, explained to Jack Daniel's spokesman, quote, "We objected and used the fact that our whiskey is different and doesn't have the characteristics of a bourbon. Rigor Motlow made several trips to the government office in Louisville to argue his case. Tests were conducted in the government laboratory there. In the end, the government did conclude that Jack Daniel's Tennessee whiskey had, quote, neither the characteristics of bourbon or rye whiskey, but rather is a distinctive product which may be labeled whiskey. The decision was spelled out in an official letter, withdrawing the agency's earlier objections to the labels as proposed." Right? It's unclear what tests were performed. We don't know. That's pretty much all we know about that background aspect. However, still, like I said before, every other legal requirement to be called a bourbon is there, but they're not going to be calling it a bourbon, and neither is most of your Jack Daniel's fans or cult following. All right, so we talked a little bit about Jack Daniel's, the juice inside the bottles. We'll talk a little bit about Jack Daniel's himself. The Jack Daniel's brand's official website suggests that its founder, Jasper Newton, quote, Jack Daniel, was born in 1850, and his tombstone bears that date, but says his exact date birth is unknown. Jack was the youngest of 10 children, born to his mother, Lucinda Cook Daniel, and his father, Callaway Daniel. After Daniel's father died in the Civil War, the boy ran away from home and was essentially orphaned at a young age. As a teenager, Daniel was taken in by Dan Call, a local lay preacher and moonshine distiller. During the 1850s, Call introduced Daniels to Uncle Nearest Green, saying, quote, Uncle Nearest is the best whiskey maker that I know of, and Green began mentoring him. Now, Nearest Green was born in Maryland around 1820, and by adulthood, he was an enslaved man working on Dan Call's farm in Tennessee. Reverend Call operated a small whiskey distillery on his farm where Green distilled whiskey using a special technique of charcoal filtering commonly used for cleaning water in West Africa. This method of filtration through sugar maple tree charcoal is now known, as we've discussed already, as the Lincoln County method. In 1875, on receiving an inheritance from his father's estate, following a long dispute with his siblings, Daniels founded a legally registering distilling business with Call, and he took over that distillery shortly after Call quit for religious reasons. After the Civil War, Dan hired Green on as a free man to serve as the first master distiller of his operation. He began using square-shaped bottles intended to convey a sense of fairness and integrity in 1895. I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but we'll talk about that because that's why this bottle may be a little bit more special than your average bottle and bond, because Jack Daniel's in some ways really led the whole bottle and bond thing pre-E.H. Taylor and the actual Bottle and Bond Act of 1897, in the sense that they're trying to protect the integrity by marketing their bottles in a way that was recognizable to the consumer base. So a little bit about some of the stuff you'll see here where it says Old Number 7. That shouldn't sound new to most of you all who are tuning in, right? But according to Daniel's biographer, the origin of the Old Number 7 brand name was the number assigned to Daniel's Distillery for government registration. He was forced to change the registration number when the federal government renewed the district, and he became number 16 in District 5 instead of number 7 in District 4. However, he continued to use his original number as a brand name since his brand reputation already had been established. An entirely different explanation is given in 1967 book Jack Daniel's Legacy, which states that his name was chosen in 1887 after a visit to a merchant friend in Tullahoma who had built a chain of 7 stores. Jeff Arnett, JD's 7th master distiller, admitted he didn't know why the brand was called Old Number 7. Some say it was the recipe number of the whiskey, or was considered a lucky number by the founder, or that it was the number of girlfriends that Jack Daniel had. Lynn Tully, Jack Daniel's great-grandniece, was told by her father that before the 1904 World's Fair, Jack Daniel sampled whiskeys from 7 barrels before deciding upon the 7th one, which won the gold medal. Jack Daniel's biography, Pete Crass, says Jack Daniel was originally assigned the district tax assessment number 7, but while consolidating districts within Tennessee, they arbitrarily gave him that number 16, as we discussed, so as not to lose his customers, neither bend the law. Jack Daniel began labeling his bottles Old Number 7. Long story short, who knows? All right, so took a pause there in the history. We'll continue that back with, in failing health, Jack Daniel gave the distillery to Lem Motlow and another nephew in 1907. Jack Daniel never married, and he did not have any children, so he took his nephews under his wing, one of which who was Lem Motlow. Lem, a son of Daniel's sister, Finetta, was skilled with numbers. He soon was responsible for all the distillery's bookkeeping. Daniel died in 1911 from blood poisoning. While the passage of the 21st Amendment in 1933 repealed prohibition at the federal level, state prohibition laws, including Tennessee's, remained in effect, thus preventing the Lynchburg distillery from reopening. Motlow, who had become a Tennessee state senator, led efforts to repeal these laws, which allowed production to restart in 1938. We fast forward, as already discussed, Brown-Forman Corporation purchased Jack Daniels in 1956. And then fast forward again to currently, Chris Fletcher became the 8th master distiller in 2020 after serving as assistant master distiller for 6 years prior. Fletcher is the grandson to the 5th master distiller, Frank Bobo. All right, that's a lot. That's Jack Daniels. That's some about the juice, some about the Jack Daniels, the man, and the corporation. So we're going to stop there, and we're going to start talking about each one of these bottles specifically. We'll start out with the lowest proof and work our way up. So up in front of us here first, we have Gentleman Jack. According to Jack Daniels, Gentleman Jack is, quote, inspired by the original Gentleman distiller and our founder, Gentleman Jack, undergoes a second charcoal mellowing to achieve exceptional smoothness, end quote. Both labels start with a fermented mash, like we talked about before, 80% corn, 12% rye, 8% malted barley. But the main difference between the two is the, quote, double mellowing process. Old Number 7 gets its first sugar maple charcoal filtration right after it comes out of the still before it gets put in the barrel. Gentleman Jack gets a secondary filtration after it comes out of the barrel and is on its way to being bottled. There are rumors that Gentleman Jack is selected from slightly better barrels that may have been aged as slightly more premium spots in the rickhouse, but that's pure conjecture, and really it's just a second filtering that turns a Jack into a gentleman. This is, by the way, the only whiskey in the world to be charcoal mellowed twice. So that's Gentleman Jack, ultra charcoal mellowed. Then we have the black label, or more specifically, the legacy black label. Why is this special? Well, until 1897, Jack Daniel's Black Label was historically produced at 90 U.S. proof. The lower end green label was an 80 proof product. However, starting in 1987, the other label variations were also reduced in proof. This began with Black Label being initially reduced to 86 proof. A further dilation of that came in 2002 when all generally available Jack Daniel's products were reduced to 80 proof. And that still continues to today. Thus further lowering production costs and excise taxes. It was met in the community with distaste, pun intended. The company countered that they believed consumers preferred lower proof products and said that the change had not hurt the sales of the brand. This is a throwback legacy to the 86 proof bottlings. That's the difference here. That and obviously the labeling. So you should be able to recognize the standard issue Jack Daniel's label as it's on t-shirts everywhere. All right, then we have Jack Daniel's Tenure. This is a very big one for me. Jack Daniel's Tenure. Let me pull this over. I want to make sure I get some of my notes right and I don't mess anything up here, guys. Jack Daniel's Tenure Tennessee whiskey is one of the most iconic. Is the iconic brand's first 10-year age-stated whiskey in more than 100 years. According to master distiller Chris Fletcher, the limited edition release was composed of a little over 200 barrels for the inaugural release this year. Due to low yield, the company assumes that they were able to put out approximately 24,000 bottles for this release. According to the press release, quote, the 10-year-old bottle design is also inspired by the brand's history, featuring a hand-drawn iteration of the original cartouche that appeared on the Jack Daniel's age-stated bottles a century ago. That's a long time ago. This 10 years of aging is much longer than the brand's norm, which usually sees their standard whiskey being aged about 4 to 5 years, and their single barrel select being aged about 5 to 7 years. Also, according to Fletcher, standard Jack Daniel's barrels are typically a mix of hundreds of barrels pulled from all levels of their 90-barrel houses, while single barrel select products originate from the top floor only. For the 10-year edition, the company first rested barrels on the top floors for 8 years before moving them to lower levels to complete their aging. While they've clearly bottled much higher, as can be seen with Jack Daniel's single barrel proof being bottled at 97 proof presents a first for the company. We've never seen that before. While not officially labeled bourbon, like we've talked about, most of Jack Daniel's meet the criteria. All right, so we already talked about that. And then last but not least is the Jack Daniel's Bottled and Bond. Right now, I know it's sold primarily at military bases and exchanges. And I don't know if that's completely all the way true, but that's where I found this one. So originally released as Bottled and Bond in August 2018, it was largely sold as a global travel retailer offering. All right, so there it goes. So it was sold back then as that, and I know now it's sold a lot in military bases. However, later the TTB approved labeling for bonded expression. You'll note it doesn't say bottled and bond. I mean, it does, but you'll see them now saying bonded. Quote, whiskey making in the 1800s too often produced a hodgepodge of subpar, counterfeit, and even dangerous spirits, says Jack Daniel's master distiller Jeff Arnett. Quote, to bring a high level of safety and consistency to American whiskeys, Congress passed the Bottle and Bond Act, which certifies the quality of whiskey carrying that designation. It had to be aged at least 4 years and bottled at 100 proof at one distillery during a single season. The Bottle and Bond Act was passed in 1897. Mr. Jack began putting his Tennessee whiskey in the now familiar square bottles 2 years earlier in 1895. This new offering replicated those rules that were set more than 120 years ago. Quote, in many ways, the introduction of Jack Daniel's Bottle and Bond is a step back into the early days of the distillery, says Marshall Farrer, Senior Vice President and Managing Director of Brown-Forman Global Travel Retail. Quote, we think so much of this whiskey that we are making a permanent member of the Jack Daniel's family of brands, end quote. While Old No. 7 standard Jack Daniel's carries no age statement, the distillery says that what's inside is generally 4 to 5 years old. We've already said that, though some of the younger stock could be included in that. We know that being bond on bond means this is at least 4 years old. But in the general approach, other than that, is generally the same, with the notable exception that this is also going to be 20 proof points higher than your standard black, or obviously six difference from the Legacy Edition. All right, we're all over here with history. So we're ready to go. We've got the blind flight ready. I'm going to pull these over to the side, and I'm going to get into the fun part. Number 1. Number 2, glass number 3, and glass number 4. All right, these were poured for me, so I don't know what's in any one of these glasses, and we're going to try to figure out, not necessarily tasting notes per se, but we're going to be trying to figure out which is better. And we'll probably get a couple tasting notes somewhere in there. All right, so we'll start with glass 1. No idea what this one is by the nose alone. Very faint. This one's got a lot of oak in it. It's pretty mellow, pun intended. Most of these are. All the Jack Daniels, that charcoal mellowing is not a marketing gimmick. I absolutely think that does something. Whether you're a fan of that or not, I've heard bourbon enthusiasts say that the charcoal mellowing filtration process removes some of that bourbon stuff we love, the flavor conagers. However, it does add some of the stuff from that, maple charcoal. So, little column A, little column B. This is a pretty good one. So far, this is my number 1. Take a quick wash. Again, a very light nose. Whew. This one tastes mellower, but equally as oaky. I keep trying to figure them out. I'm really trying to stop myself doing that, because the whole point of a blind flight is to be blind until the reveal. And I keep finding myself trying to look over at the bottles and try to guess. I need to stay here and figure out which one's better than the others. I have a thought that these two are going to battle themselves out somewhat. A lot of similarities. I got to stop because I'll end up killing that thing before I'm even done with a 3 and 4. I'm going to put it slightly behind glass 1 for now. Slightly behind. Ooh, this has got a nice nose on it. It's got more flavor than the others in terms of the nosing. Still light. This is an extremely hard flight because, unsurprisingly, they all taste like Jack Daniels, and they're all very similar. I have a Jack Daniels single barrel reserve back there that I decided not to put in the flight because it's like over 130 proof, and you'd be able to pick it out of a flight very, very easily, and that kind of goes against the whole point of it. Dang. I really like this one. This one's going to climb over too. That one's got more flavor. Something tannic on the end I'm not digging. Dang. I have no idea which ones are which. Truly. And I don't know which one I like. Not really. I think glass one. Not this one. This is the last one. That's 100%. That one tastes, that's got to be the legacy. This tastes like a shelfer. I'm sorry. I really hope it's not Jack Daniel's Tannic because I'm going to look like a jerk. But, nope. It's not that one. I don't even need to sip that one again. That's last. Okay, let's start over. We're going to move glass 1, glass 2, glass 3. The glass 4 is out of the equation. This has some really nice complexities to it, but it's also simple. Does that sound like it doesn't make sense? Because it doesn't make sense to me either. But it's good, it's working. What did I say? I said these two are going to fight, so let's go ahead and make them do that, I guess, again. This has got some of like a cherry, a fruit, maybe a banana, something going on in terms of like fruity flavors. Like these two actually are similar now. That's weird. Oh my goodness, what's going on here? Oh, this is good. This has got a lot of the oak on it. I really like the oak on this one. Man, this is tough. I want to make a guess, and I've done this, and every time I say, I'm not going to do it, and then I look like an idiot because I've almost always been wrong. I think this is the Bib, this is the Tenure, this is the Gentleman Jack, and this is the your standard Legacy. That's my guess, but I'm probably going to be wrong. But that's my guess right now, halfway through. Man, this is so hard. I'm going to put this one back because there's something tannic on that. I don't know, man. All right. I'm going to put this one next because I've got to start calling this or you guys are going to be sitting here for an hour. So, without further digging in, I'm going to put this one so I got number 4, I got number 3. It's down to glass 2 and 3 as places number 1 and 2. Let's figure that out. And I'm really trying not to let my bias come in. We'll see, because you definitely need to remove that, coming in. That's why you need to have somebody else, pour the glasses for you. You really try not to do what I just did there and guess. Defeats the whole purpose. But sometimes it can't be helped. That has got a nice nose on it. That's kind of like I'm getting a little bit more of that oak. Yeah, this is delicious. Because, and I do, like I said, I do think this is probably the 10-year because I get a touch of the aged oak thing going on. And if I'm wrong, then maybe that charcoal-mellowing thing is really working here to give me some of the things I'm missing, on some of the other Jack Daniels. And if this is Legacy, then, man, I'm just going to go buy a whole bunch of, bottles right now or something because I like that bit. 10 years is not that long. I think 8 to 12 years is a solid age point for a bourbon or a whiskey. You know, I don't want to offend the Jack Daniels fans, but I think 8 to 12 is a super fantastic spot to be. However, that does not translate necessarily to like a mature oak that you find on like a 18, 20, 23, 25 year, whiskey bourbon. But I get a little bit of that. Maybe it's because if this is 10, I'm getting 4 5s and then 10. That's a huge leap, but we'll see in a moment. I like that. I think it's that one. I think that's the one I'm going to go with. But and everybody has their preferences, because I think if I recall, and we'll get a hit recall in a second, this one has some fruitier kind of flavorful notes that this one absolutely doesn't have. But I like the oak. I like the age. So I think for me, this one's speaking louder than this one. But this does not mean that this is lesser. And I think if you like this over that kind of deal, you could pick this over that. These are both fantastic. Crap. Okay, I'm going to call it. My favorite glass is glass 3. My second favorite is glass 2. My third favorite is glass 1. And my fourth, nowhere near. I think one last sip, then out of fairness. I gave everybody like multiple sips because this guy one last sip, but he's not coming up, I'm telling you. No. It's not awful. God, if this is Jack 10, I don't know, man. Please. Please don't be. All right, we'll start here. Gentleman Jack. Oh, no. Gentleman Jack. Glass 3. Jack Daniel's Legacy. All right, thank God. There it is. All right. Not that it really matters, but all right. Here it is. This is the big reveal, right? Glass number 2 in second place is Jack Daniel's Bottled and Bond, which leaves Jack Daniel's 10. Well, I told you I might mess that up because I think I had originally said I thought these two, glass 1 and glass 4, were this way. I thought Jack Daniel's Legacy was Gentleman Jack. Yeah, it was this way. So, man, I do not like Gentleman Jack. So I think why I might not like Gentleman Jack, like I said earlier, is that charcoal filtration, in some opinions, I guess including mine, is that it removes some of the things that I love personally in a bourbon. And I think that charcoal filtration works, as we see here, because especially this Bottled and Bond and Tenure, they were great. I think it just, while it can add something here, doing it twice removes too much. Jack Daniel's Legacy, because I thought that, these were all actually kind of in a close fight, which is kind of crazy because while the Bib and the Tenure were definitely like neck and neck, this wasn't like a humongous leap. And when I rated it by itself, this is embarrassing, y'all, I rated it a 2.0 on a 5.0 rating scale. That's below middle of the road. But that's the fun of these blind flight fights, because sometimes you find stuff out about yourself. And maybe this deserves a revisit. I doubt the standard issue 80 proof black label you're going to get is going to meet my personal preference to rank it definitely higher. But the Legacy, the 86 proof, probably deserves a relook, if I'm being fair. Gentleman Jack, nope, I'm going to push that. No thanks. But the Bottled and Bond, the Tenure, they're supposed to be standard releases. I truly hope that's the case. And if it is, I'll be in line. So if you guys have had these 4, you've had 1, you've had 2, you've had 3, you've had them all, let me know what y'all thought. I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. But other than that, thanks for joining in, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Cheers.